How many hours and years of our lives do we spend on work? For nearly all of us, we spend 30 plus years and 1/3 of our days in our vocation. More time perhaps than we spend at rest or at play. But this isn't a problem. Why? Because work is good. Work needs to be integrated deeply into our lives and must be in line with our most important goals and values. And if it is, we have a far more complete and fulfilling life experience. Welcome to the How People Work podcast, where we explore the intersection of how humans think and act and how they apply themselves to their work. When you understand both of these things, you'll be equipped to be insightful, compassionate, and compelling leaders. Previously on the How People Work podcast,
we're excited to talk today about a little bit about the revival of the podcast and what's going on there, but also just continuing our narrative, our main narrative that we've been trying to communicate to the world all along is that work is good. Yeah, like let's have expectations of care. Let's have expectations of feeling connected to the mission. Let's have progress discussion with managers and have opportunities to develop and have your opinion count, but also have patience.
Yeah.
And understanding,
yeah,
and compassion in the other direction,
yeah,
empathy in the other direction,
yeah,
you know, and I think then, yes, very much so, it's fair,
yeah,
but only paired with those things.
I've been talking a little, and this is, I think, in a similar vein, but with people on my team over the last week or so about, what does it look like to give people the benefit of the doubt? And, feeling like there's enough relationship, rapport, trust, within those work relationships that you can extend that. Because I think, what does it mean to give someone the benefit of the doubt? It's like you're assuming the best. And in order to assume the best, you've got to have some empathy, for them, because you're believing that their intentions are good, which means that you're saying, I have enough of a window into their heart, I think, to assume that whatever they intend here, even if I see or feel it differently, is for good. It's not for some other intent that's, negative or against me. And that's a hard thing. And I think it requires that empathy that you're talking about.
Yeah, it very much does. And when I've seen that go well in teams, those teams are incredibly malleable, flexible. They can maneuver a lot of change. They can jump through a lot of hoops and have a lot of stuff thrown at them because the trust is such that they can kind of jive and weave. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then teams that don't have that can hardly do one thing.
Yeah.
By comparison, it's like any change just blows the whole thing down.
Yeah.
So it's vital.
Well, I think what's interesting, I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I think it relates to just even the expectation of what you experience at work.
Yeah.
Is there's a quote I've been hearing a lot recently with some things that we've been working on here at Fringe. And it's a Steve Jobs analogy. So it's less of a quote, it's an analogy, but he used this image of a rock tumbler. And so I don't know if you ever had one of those when you were a kid that you could take just the raw, rough rocks. I had one, and we actually got one. Caleb got one recently for Christmas a couple years ago from my grandparents. And so you can just take rough rocks, any that you find anywhere and whatever, and you put them into this tumbler, and there's grit that you put into the tumbler, and you add different amounts, and then it just rolls. And then the rocks just knocking against each other and the grit that's all in there, this tumbling process, after a couple of days you pull it out and you get these beautifully polished stones. No, you get these beautifully polished smooth minerals. Beautiful. So the rock that was all jagged and rough and just a hunk of you couldn't even see the colors on it is now this smooth beautiful stone that you can see the mineral, and you can see the
clearly not up on my geology.
But he tells this analogy because he says that, or uses that analogy because he says that's how good teams work, is that you actually need the friction in order to produce a good result, because it's that tension that creates the opportunity to grow, to progress, to move forward. And I've heard another analogy too, like if you're trying to freehand draw a straight line with a pencil, that if you apply counter pressure with your other hand, you can actually draw a straighter line. And so it's, again, just another analogy to this like tension and the counter pressure that actually helps you achieve a better outcome. And I think that's where something like, empathy and being willing to give people the benefit of the doubt matters, because if we accept that the tension helps create a better result for us, helps us solve problems better, then we actually need it. Like the goal isn't avoiding tension, it's actually to have productive tension, where everyone can move forward positively and we still like each other and all that at the end of it, but that we're achieving a better outcome, we're achieving a better goal in our mission because of that tension. We're allowed to have that conflict in a healthy way.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I feel like I was about to just reiterate your whole point. I was like, I'll just save us.
Well, I wonder though if there's some generational, because this analogy was from a Steve Jobs video, like probably 2 decades ago.
Yeah, probably.
Right,
so, yeah.
If not longer.
Yeah.
And so generationally, there's a different kind of employee in the workforce. And so, again, I think about my daughter and, what is her temperament? How did she grow up?
Right.
What are the things that she expects? Would she expect an absence of conflict?
Right.
Or would she take conflict as purely a negative experience in the workplace?
Interesting.
Because of maybe the environment she was brought up in, or what her expectations are from school or friendships or her things that surround her.
Interesting. So are you trying to say the younger generations are soft? Is that what you're trying to say?
I wasn't saying that.
Let's just come out with it, man.
You said it.
Somebody's gonna quote it, put it on LinkedIn. Please don't take
a tribute to Jordan Peace.
I did not say that. I'm in the younger generations. I don't want that to be true, right? Just barely in the younger generations that we're discussing today, as we arbitrarily divide Millennial and Gen Z and X and Y.
Hey, putting people in a box is great.
I don't recommend it. But yeah, there is. Yeah, that's interesting though. I mean, it's more about that childhood stuff. It's more about that, like, what did you come to expect, and how did you come to see the world, or how did you even expect work to go?
Right.
Yeah. Like if you were a boomer and you picked up your encyclopedia as a kid and flipped to W where it said work, like you would see like a bunch of men, up on the Eiffel Tower, sitting on a crane, eating their lunch. Yeah. Like that famous photo, and go, yeah, that's work.
Yeah.
And like a Gen Xer would have seen something else in that same encyclopedia, and a millennial, we would have used encyclopedia. Our younger millennials would have Googled it. But that it's that wherever you got your information from, your perspective of what work will be is completely different based off of when you grew up. And then, of course, you've got people 1 and 2 and sometimes even 3 generations ahead of you leading the companies you're working for. That's a whole lot of trying to understand each other across eras.
Right, because leadership is generally going to be Gen X.
Yeah, typically.
Older millennials at best.
Yeah.
Based on career stage. And so, there is also that divide or that dynamic that's taking place. I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm opening a can of worms here, but
go for it.
The one, like when I read that quote that we had, the one that kind of gets me, and I don't know how to feel about it, is feeling that their opinions count.
Oh.
And so you're 20 years old, you're fresh out of school. Like, let's be honest, you haven't experienced a whole lot of life yet. Like, why should your opinion count?
Right.
I mean, I know I'm baiting you a little bit
You're
with
totally
that question.
baiting me with that question.
But, I think if we assume that this individual is intrinsically valuable.
Yep.
So discounting their opinion doesn't mean that they don't have worth as a human.
Sure.
But, what is it about the insistence that, their opinion should count, that we should take into consideration.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for experience. There really is. Like, let's not hide from it. There's a lot to be said for doing a thing, failing at it, doing it again, failing in all new way, doing it again, failing really creatively a third time, right? Doing it again and succeeding. You learned every way not to do a thing, and like, you're just going to make less mistakes. That's a thing.
Yeah.
That's a thing to have experience. But there's also a fresh perspective of somebody fresh out of school, that they can see how the world is what it's become, what it's becoming, how it's going to be.
Yeah.
They probably could project the next 10 years, 20 years for you better.
Yeah.
Because they know their generation.
Yeah.
They know how they think, they know how they spend their time. They know who your consumer is going to be. Or who they already are, potentially. Depends on what your business is. You know? So, not to mention, I know I'm going to sound a million years old saying this, but how is social media being handled right now? Like, what platform should we be on? How do we post this? What hashtags do we use? Do I tag people? Do I not tag? I don't know. And so there's so much that every generation is bringing all of these specific strengths and these areas of knowledge and these areas of expertise that are under the surface, and you really don't see the expertise unless you're looking.
Right.
Unless you're giving them respect that they have not yet earned, but you let them borrow it anyway, so that you can see who they really are, what they really have to say, and you can actually learn a lot. But that takes humility on behalf of leadership, in order to do that. And also, let's be honest, can sometimes be misconstrued as a leader doesn't know what they're doing because they're asking those brand new how to do things, as opposed to seeing that as like, oh, my leader is a learner.
Some of the deference can be perceived as a lack of strength or ability or competence.
Which is not helpful, because then you're going to get less of that behavior from your leadership.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think honestly, I wasn't sure which direction you were going to take that.
I could argue it, a lot of ways, but it's always like, you got to strike a balance of, when you first walk into any new thing, whether it's a team or a book club or a new job or anything, and whether you're 20 or you're 55, there is a little bit of being new. But when you're really young, you're kind of seen as new, whether you're new or not. And which is a bit of a bias, right? But that bias is real, whether it's fair or not. And and so there is this balance to strike of your opinions do matter, but also make sure to show respect to those that have been at it for a while. Otherwise, they don't feel like you value them at all, and then when people don't feel like you value them at all, they don't tend to like you. For making them feel that way. So that's everybody's got to think about how everybody else is feeling in the situation.
I think what it kind of crystallizes for me that's actually really helpful in the way you described it is that it's not that any and all opinions matter. It's that opinions in the right context and in the right arena matter. So the analogy that came to mind is, I've been coaching basketball with my daughter's team for a couple of years now. And so as the coach, you're usually the one giving the instruction. You're usually the one that your opinions matter because you know more and you have more experience and you're teaching these girls how to play the game of basketball. But there's going to be times where, some of your better players especially, but they're young. They're, these are girls that are kids. 15 to 18 years old, might come and say, hey, coach, I'm seeing this thing in a game, this player is doing that on the opposing team. What if we did this? And it's oh, I hadn't noticed that because I'm paying attention to all these other things going on here. And so your opinion in that matter
is huge.
It's
might
offering
be the difference in the game.
It's not because you have more experience. It's because you're seeing something that I'm not seeing.
That's right.
And so,
perspective.
yeah, it's more than it's just an opinion. It's actually like someone's able to offer an observation from a different vantage point that like you just don't have. As the coach, you're on the sideline, you're seeing things from your perspective. And so I think that's a great way to maybe think about what you were describing for these younger employees. They just have a different vantage point. They have a different perspective. They have a different way that they observe and see the world from, us, or certainly Gen X and older generations. And there can be value for us to glean from those perspectives.
Yeah. I mean, it's a heck of a thing, to be a part of anything, whether it's, like I said, whether it's a book club or a religious institution or a company or what, where you have people 15, 20, 25, 30 years apart from each other, working on the same team, essentially. I mean, there's so much challenge in that, in terms of just the difference in perspectives, the difference in expectations, the difference in what work even is and how it's viewed, all the biases back and forth across the different generations. I'm arguing with my 11-year-old all the time. She just has this perspective that, like, the newer something is, the better it is. And literally it's just value judgment. It's just the iPhone 16 is better than the 14. Therefore, anyone that has a newer thing, or I don't know what, if you're younger, everything newer is better. And I'm like, I can't even talk to you. I'm like, I love you, but that is so foolish. I get it with an iPhone because you made the camera better and it's the same thing otherwise. So sure, but not with ideas or philosophies or the deeper things in life. So there's just a lot with age that the perspectives are so different, and nobody's all right and nobody's all wrong.
Right.
But somebody's got to lead and somebody's got to follow at the same time. And we have to navigate relationship with authority simultaneously.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think all this means for how companies should think about designing the employee experience? Because I think there's, the companies that do this well, that, get good ratings from their employees, that are great places to work and so on. They do it with intention. It's
absolutely
not happening by accident. And so what do you think are some ways to maybe think better, think differently about that intention, given some of the things that we've talked about?
Yeah, I think it depends on if you're a small company or you're a large one, or you're intending on being a large one, right? If you are going to have 4, 5, 10 levels of management, and there's no way that the CEO is going to know everybody, right? Basically, it's kind of how I would determine if it's possible for the CEO to know everybody or if it's not, right? Because those are two very different cultures, very different cultures, right? So in a small company, you're really just trying to breed trust, if people trust their leadership, they will stay and they will believe you when you say, hey, I'm looking out for opportunities for you. I see a path for you. And if you're not saying that to them, then, that could be another different indication. But there's just more one-to-one trust going on there in relationship that's really yielding that person feeling connected to the mission, feeling a sense of belonging. It's the culture, it's the trust, it's all of that. If you're a larger organization, then I think you have to really produce a strong career path for people. You have to kind of map it out and show them. It's not a bad idea with a small company either, but it's just there's only but so many places they can go in a small organization, 50 people, 100 people, right?
Right.
So your career path is going to lead everybody to the exact same position that they can't all occupy, right?
Right.
So in a large organization, I think, one of the things that I saw when we were with Northwestern Mutual that they did pretty well is, even though there was some occasional backroom criticism of the people that left, at least publicly and corporately, what I saw was a celebration of people who used to work here.
Right.
And it was like, hey, we launch people really well. They tend to have really successful careers after this.
They go on and do other great things.
And for one, they're right. That tends to be accurate in my watching
the people
what's gone on with people that work there. But two, they celebrate people who leave.
Right.
And I think that's so important because it's not a corporate it's not a corporate ladder. It's a corporate pyramid.
Yeah.
And it always will be. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that it's a scheme, even though we associate those two words now with pyramid. But it isn't. Not everybody's going to the same place. Not everybody should be even targeting the same place, right? Because ideally with work, you're not pursuing the highest position you could get. You're pursuing the one that's most interesting to you.
Right.
The one that's most life-giving to you. Right? You find a role that's VP of such and such and you love it.
Yeah.
Then you should tell your boss, hey, I'd love X% raise every year if we can pull that off. Otherwise, can I stay here, please?
Yeah.
I love this. So I think enjoyment should be, anyway, that's my own philosophy there. But you have to celebrate people leaving because if everybody is career pathing up to the same point or the same few points on the map.
Yeah. Not everyone can
You're
get it.
just lying to people. They're not all going there.
Right.
So you have to more, I think, focus on enjoying being here, believing in the mission, getting the skills developed, and knowing that there are off-ramps if you want them, if you're just ready for that, if the opportunity presents itself. It's no hard feelings. It's we love you, be good.
Right.
Go forth and conquer type, thing. Because otherwise, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You're just setting expectations to actually shoot you in the foot.
Yeah.
If you don't also celebrate the off ramp.
Yeah.
You have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something really interesting that I think connects to what you were saying. So we've been working on some different parts of our product over the past year and have done a lot of extensive user testing and research in the course of preparing to develop some of these features that we're going to be rolling out.
Right.
And so we talked to a bunch of different employees that were at large companies.
Right.
And one of the things that was really interesting that we learned, because we were talking about just perceptions on feeling seen at their organization, how they feel cared for, what recognition feels meaningful to them, and some of those kinds of things. And what we found is even within big organizations, the experience with your immediate team was what mattered most.
Yeah.
And so there were people that we talked to that overall had neutral to even negative ratings of the company at large or the company's leadership that was several levels above, but they would have very positive ratings of their immediate team. And so it makes me think that in some ways thinking of all organizations as just a conglomerate of small companies. In some ways it's like that, whether or not that's how the company sees it. I think that's the experience that employees are having because, even in a big company, your interaction is going to be with a core of individuals, unless you're in a big company that reorgs regularly or something like that. And so you just end up switching teams every year, something like that. Your experience is going to be with, probably 40 to 60 individuals, at most. That's a small company, and that's going to make up the bulk of your experience. So I think in some ways, designing the experience of employees intentionally, setting aside something like the career pathing, which I think is different depending on organization size, how you feel seen, what you experience with coworkers, colleagues, management, and your day-to-day probably looks pretty similar in some respects, whether you're a big company or small company.
I think so. I don't know if there's a great deal of difference. I mean, the only real difference is maybe there's a little bit of a mental awareness of people outside of those 40 to 60, a little bit of just I wonder what it's like over there on that team. There's a little bit more of that because you're seeing it right in your face. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It all comes down to relationships at the end of the day. I mean, people are looking for, two things primarily, employees from what I can tell. They want to be treated with respect, they want to be heard, and they want to be compensated fairly. you know, and there's not always agreement on what fairly means, but like that's the desire.
Yeah.
That's the want. You know, of course it is.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it comes down to just the relationships day to day. Who do you see? Who are you sitting in meetings with? Who are you receiving emails from? What's the tenor of those messages? Are people kind? Are they demanding? Are they in a hurry? Are they overly casual? And are they lazy? I mean, it just, you know, it's like, is there people talking crap about the boss behind, you know, like, or is there not? And it all comes down to, because that's your experience of your job. That's what work feels like, you know, regardless of what's going on the macro level of the company. And, you know, that's why we just can't push culture hard enough, you know, and trust hard enough. It's that ultimately is what people want. Yeah. You know, and if you want the best people, yes, pay them well, give them good benefits, but show them trust, respect, dignity, you know, point them in the right direction and let them run.
Next time on the How People Work podcast, help employees self-discover those kinds of things, because the intrinsic motivation that arises from that is actually going to be beneficial, not just to the employee, but to the organization as well.
You know, you have this overemphasis. If I'm in charge, just shut up and do it.
Right.
What blend of the old school and the new school are we going to bring to it?
Right.
And what are we going to create as a culture of work